Hello, fellow Shakespeareans. This is episode 5 of SONGspeare 2020, which is all about the Passionate Pilgrim. The Passionate Pilgrim. Now, this episode is potentially an awkward one because The Passionate Pilgrim is not a play, so none of the musical settings that you might find of the texts, which are all just poems in The Passionate Pilgrim, are things that you'd expect to hear in a play or make you imagine what types of song you would hear while you're watching the play. They're all just poems. So sure, composers love setting poetry to music, and this is pretty much just poetry. Now, whose poetry is it? Probably not William Shakespeare's for the most part. There's a complicated history to The Passionate Pilgrim, but basically a publisher, potentially William Jaggard, capitalizing off of Shakespeare's fame, he had written Venus and Adonis, which is a narrative poem, and also he was fairly famous already for Romeo and Juliet and Love is Labour's Lost. The name The Passionate Pilgrim may actually be inspired by Romeo and Juliet in the scene where Romeo and Juliet first meet and they have the whole dialogue about being a pilgrim and, oh, these hands pray, blah, 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 blah. So far, I haven't done an episode on any of the non-play works. I skipped the sonnets, but that's basically because there's a ton of music, so I'm gonna take some time later in the year and really delve into those when I have the time and when I'm not trying to catch up with the 4 plays that have music this month. Looking at which poems in The Passionate Pilgrim were actually by William Shakespeare, it's not really for any reason because of their quality or the way that they're written, it's really just because you find them other places. So there are 5 poems in The Passionate Pilgrim that we believe to be by William Shakespeare because we find them in other places. 2 of them are reworkings of sonnets that he published elsewhere, and then 3 of them are the 3 sonnets that the 3 lovers in Love is Labour's Lost write and perform for each other, basically, that they're planning on reciting to their loved ones. So we know Shakespeare wrote those because we're pretty confident he wrote the sonnets that he claims to have written, and we're pretty confident that he wrote Love is Labour's Lost. So The Passionate Pilgrim basically took a bunch of works by Shakespeare, put them in the very beginning, and then let the reader believe that the rest of the 20 poems were by Shakespeare. And really, many of them we know were not, and some of them we don't know who they were by, but were they by William Shakespeare? We're just not sure. Love's Labour's Lost didn't have enough music to merit its own episode, but one of the sonnets, On a Day, Alack the Day, actually does have different settings, which I decided to push onto the Passionate Pilgrim episode. At the time, I hadn't read the Passionate Pilgrim, so I didn't realize that the lines are slightly different, the words are slightly different, 2 lines are missing from the Passionate Pilgrim that are in Love's Labour's Lost, so you're gonna hear the text from Love's Labour's Lost, not as you find it in the Passionate Pilgrim, but I assume you'll forgive me, and if not, the other text we're going to hear is one that probably wasn't by William Shakespeare, but it has inspired a lot of settings, and I really like the musical setting. So we'll kind of cheat and maybe have some not Shakespeare, maybe Shakespeare, imagined Shakespeare lyrics. It's Crab at Age and Youth, which is a pretty popular poem from The Passionate Pilgrim, but we do assume that it came from a larger poem. Crab at Age and Youth first appeared in a collection called The Garland of Good Will. I didn't memorize it, let's see. Which was a collection of song lyrics published by Thomas Deloney. So was he the author? Was Shakespeare the author but didn't take credit for it? Seems a little unlikely. Only the first stanza appears in The Passionate Pilgrim, so the rest of the poem kind of makes it clear that the speaker or the subject of the poem is a young lady who's being kind of accosted by this older man and saying like, no, I'm not interested in you, I'm interested in my love who's younger. Taken on its own, it sort of just sounds like a meditation on how being young is great and being old sucks. I'm sorry, I didn't write it, and really I think the rest of the poem has a little bit more nuance to it, but yeah, as it stands, it's basically youth good, age bad, but the contrast between the 2 is pretty fun. Starting off with On a Day, Alack the Day, we're going to hear Hubert Parry's musical setting. Hubert Parry, I've already talked about. You can look him up. He was a teacher of Ralph Vaughan Williams, very English, but also sort of adventurous, and he builds a lot of intensity in his music, which is nice because that's what we've come to expect from art songs. This particular setting starts off kind of slow, but it builds up, and I think the thing that really sold me on it was the texture at the end and where it sort of builds. Now, an interesting thing that I think should be talked about rather than brushed under the rug or ignored, the original lyric of this poem, On a Day, Alack the Day, as it appears in Love's Labour's Lost, has a line about Jove mistaking Juno for an Ethiop, which is kind of part and parcel for the way that Shakespeare talks about color and skin color, and he uses it a lot. Do I think we should necessarily clean up all that language or remove it? Probably not all the time. I think it's an active conversation. I don't think that's the answer. It's just where I lean right now. But I do think that a conversation is in order. The conversation's happening right now. And I also think it's contextual. So in this case, you know, if we're talking about the Passionate Pilgrim, this is just poetry that sort of exists on its own. Since this poem is the text from Love's Labour's Lost, even if you wanted to change the text in Love's Labour's Lost, it's a sonnet that he has written that he is reading aloud to his friends. So I think that changing a word is probably not the worst thing. Now, I chose to replace the word with lady, which was, I don't even think I really planned it, it just came out of my mouth. So the idea changes from Jove would mistake Juno for an Ethiop to Jove would mistake Juno, who is a goddess, as a lady who's not a goddess. So it's a different image, but it's similar enough that I hope it still works, and it's just 2 syllables, so you probably won't even notice it, except for the fact that I pointed it out. So here is a slightly more racially sensitive, perhaps, version of Hubert Parry's On a Day, Alack the Day.
Fair, playing in the wanton air, through the velvet leaves the wind, all unseen can passage find, that the lovers seek to himself the heaven's breath. Ere, quoth he, thy cheeks may blow, ere would I might triumph so. But alack, my hand is sworn, ne'er to pluck thee from thy thorn. Thou, alack, for youth unmeet, youth so apt to pluck our sweet. Do not call it sin in me, that I am forsworn for thee. Thou for whom Jove would swear, Juno but a lady were, and deny himself for Jove, turning mortal for thy love, turning mortal for thy love.
Now, the reason that I chose to perform Crab at Age and Youth, even though it's probably not by William Shakespeare, is because of the several settings I had of that text, there were 3 that jumped out at me. First, to keep Hubert Parry altogether, he'll lead off this episode, is another setting by Hubert Parry. So his Crabbed Age and Youth, really all of the settings have this contrast between youth is like this, age is like this, and you see a lot of difference in the music. So it's fun to see how every single composer chooses to treat that. Youth is associated with birth and rebirth and liveliness, and then age is sort of the denouement of life, right? The denouement. So here is Hubert Parry's setting of Crabbed Age and Youth.
Crabbed age and youth cannot live together. Youth is full of pleasance, age is full of care. Youth like summer morn, age like winter weather. Youth like summer brave, age like winter bare. Youth is full of sport, age's breath is short. Youth is nimble, age is lame. Youth is hot and bold, age is weak and cold. Youth is wild, and age is tame. Age I do abhor thee, youth I do adore thee. Oh, my love is young. Age I do divide thee. O sweet shepherd, hide thee, for methinks, thou stay'st, for methinks thou stay'st too long.
The second setting of Crabbed Age and Youth is from a composer whom I had no clue about prior to finding his music, Donald Francis Tovey. He lived from 1875 to 1940 and was a British musicologist and writer and music reviewer, I think, and an analyst. And one of his better-known works, I guess, is Essays in Musical Analysis, and he also prepared editions of Bach and Beethoven. But he's not very well known as a composer, so I had never heard of him. This setting of Crabbed Age and Youth is a bit of a production. I'm joined once again by Cindy Lindeen-Martin, because as I looked through the piano accompaniment, I kind of just thought, I can't get all this under my fingers in time. So she is helping me out with another accompaniment. The piece is quite long, you know, it's the same text, and it has the same sort of sectional youth is like this, age is like this, and he takes a little more time to set each musical mood more intentionally. The end is sort of a section in and of itself, so it's a little more dramatically like that than the Parry. It is related to the music you've heard before, but yeah, Donald Francis Tovey, Crabbed Age and Youth.
Crabbed age and youth cannot live together, cannot live together. Youth is full of pleasance, age is full of care. Youth like summer morn, hide thee, for methinks thou stayest too long. Methinks thou stayest too long. Oh, sweet shepherd, hide thee, for methinks thou stayest too long.
The last setting of Crapid Age and Youth is by another composer we've heard from, Harvey Worthington Loomis. He is not super well known, but I like his music. I can't find much of his music, and that's, I think, maybe the last we'll hear from him in terms of Shakespeare songs. I could be wrong. It's a long list. I haven't memorized it. His setting of Crapid Age and Youth is probably the most frolicsome. It's the lightest and the most sort of random and funny, perhaps. It's the shortest as well, and while it still has that contrast between age and youth, I think the whole thing comes off a little bit more as a big old joke. It was not the easiest thing to put together with a singer who can't actually sing at the same time as the pianist, but hopefully I did all right. There are a few places that maybe it gets away from me, but I'll let you be the judge. Do judge me. I don't know. Or don't. Here is Harvey Worthington Loomis's Crapid Age and Youth.
Crapid age and youth cannot live together. Youth is full of pleasure, age is full of care. Youth like summer morn, age like winter weather. Youth like summer brave, age like winter bare. Youth is full of sport, age's breath is short. Youth is nimble, age is lame. Youth is hot and bold, age is weak and cold. Youth is wild and age is tame. Age, I do abhor thee, youth, I do adore thee. Oh, my love is young. Age, I do defy thee. Oh, sweet shepherd, hide thee, for methinks thou stayest too long.
So, there are 4 settings of lyrics found in The Passionate Pilgrim or Love's Labour's Lost if you're looking at On a Day, Alack the Day. 3 absolutely not by Shakespeare, or very probably not by Shakespeare. We don't know for sure, but they probably weren't. In future weeks, I'm sure we'll be returning to actual Shakespeare. Coming up will be Midsummer Night's Dream, then The Merchant of Venice, then Much Ado About Nothing, then As You Like It. And if I can get them boom, boom, boom right in a row, I'll be really proud of myself. It's coming along and I'm trying to stay ahead, so not to sound like a broken record, but if you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you hated it, give me a thumbs down. If you have something to say about it, leave comments. If you want to see future episodes, subscribe to my channel. It's the big red button. Thank you so much for watching. It's really turned into this amazing adventure for me to learn all this music and to record it and to be thinking about the rep, thinking about the composers, thinking about microphones and how to set up a home studio that's, you know, obviously in a kind of small space. So it's been a great distraction, but I also am loving all of the support and all of the feedback and all of the involvement from everybody who's been listening. So thank you. If you keep it up, I'll keep it up. I'll probably keep it up anyway, because I just have to have something to do. So, see you next time.